here we are, on this very day, all around the world, people from every background, every socioeconomic class, every color of skin, speaking nearly every language known to man. Some 2 billion people strong will gather in homes, in stadiums, outside as the sun rises, underground for fear of persecution, and in churches large and small, all gathering to celebrate one event that occurred 2,000 years ago in a far-off, insignificant corner of the Roman Empire. An event that by all means should have been forgotten long ago, has seen for the past 2,000 years not a single year where it went without being celebrated, where people did not mark their calendars by it, where people did not point to it as the pinnacle event of human history. For 2,000 years, its influence has not died, and its movement has spread further and further to more and more people. See, 2,000 years ago, there knelt a man in an urban garden. It was night. The city was Jerusalem, whose population would have just swelled by thousands of people as Jewish people from all over the world would have returned back to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. But at this point, despite the swell in population, the city would have been quiet. The stars would be shining overhead, and the people would be fast asleep. But there in that urban garden knelt a man with his best friends behind him, beginning to doze off with the rest of the city. But he would sit there, he would kneel, and cry out, "Father, take this cup from me. There must be another way. Father, take this cup from me," he would cry out again. Face contorting in anguish, he would have sweat dripping from his face like drops of blood puddling underneath him as he would cry out again, "Father, there must be another way." As he sat there, facing the pain of what was in front of him, realizing that the challenge that lay on the other side of this would be the hardest battle, the most difficult challenge any human had ever faced in the course of human history. But knowing that there was no other way, he soon, while kneeling there, uttered the words that would set in motion the event that would change the world. As he knelt there, he would say, "Father, not my will, but yours be done." And with that, the clock began ticking, the ball began rolling, and this event that would change everything, that we're sitting here celebrating today, would be set in motion. See, because soon a detachment of temple guards would come, and they would arrest this man who had been starting a movement. He had swept across the Judean countryside, drawing crowds of thousands upon thousands of people, telling the people that weren't supposed to matter that they mattered. Telling the people on the outside to come inside, and telling the people who were supposed to be last that they could be first, telling the people that everyone had given up on, that God hadn't given up on them. He was challenging the status quo. He was challenging the way that the religious leaders of that time understood the world and its God. And because he's challenged the status quo, they said, this man, well, he has to go. And so when they sent that detachment of temple guards to pick him up, much to the surprise of everyone sitting there, who had seen him walk on water, heal the sick, raise the dead, give sight to the blind, rather than miraculously escaping, he gave himself over, was led away in chains, marched down to the temple, where they would begin questioning him throughout the night. And they questioned him all throughout the night under the cover of night because they wouldn't dare do it during the day lest the people protested. So as night dragged on, they would call in false witness after false witness, trying to find some charge to levy against this man. But it turns out it's hard to find a crime to charge someone with who has never once committed a single sin. But as the night drew on, they brought in yet more witnesses and more witnesses until one man stood there and said, "I heard this man say, 'Tear down the temple and I will rebuild it in just 3 days.'" And they asked him, "Is this true?" And of course it was. He had indeed said that, but he wasn't talking about a physical building. He was talking about his own body, but he didn't bother clarifying because he knew what must happen. So rather, he just simply said, in quoting Daniel 7 and Psalm 110, said, "I tell you the truth, from now on you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds, sitting at the right hand of power." And you might say, why is that such a big deal? But upon hearing those words uttered, the religious leaders would tear their robes, cry out, "Blasphemy!" Because what this man had just claimed was that he was equal with God, that he had the same authority as God and was in fact one with God. And they said, "We know God. You are nothing like him. We know what God is like. God is a God of rules. God created rules to be followed, people to follow them, and punishes those who don't. And you seem to not understand that paradigm. God is for this group of people and this group only, and you seem to think he's for everyone. You don't understand." So with that, they had finally found the charge to levy against him. So they marched him down to the Roman governor's palace. As night drew into morning, they knocked on his front door. He would come down and see this large group of religious leaders standing at his door with this man sitting in chains and ask, "What do you want?" They would look at him and they'd say, "We want you to execute this man." He said, "For what?" They say, "Because he has broken our religious law. He has claimed things no man can claim. He has said that he is God and that can't be." And he said, "That sounds like a you problem. It sounds like a religious problem. That's not my issue." But before he could turn and leave, the religious leaders, being quick on their feet, looked at him, Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, and said, "But wait. You're a good Roman boy, Pilate. You see, this man, as he went throughout the Judean countryside, drawing these large crowds and preaching and teaching to all these people, he claimed that he was starting this kingdom, starting this movement, that he was in fact a king. And, well, Pilate, you know that in Rome there is but one king, so any man claiming to be king, well, that's a threat to the empire." Clearly this man was no threat to the empire. But upon hearing that, Pilate had to take him in and begin to question him. And so he questioned him with question after question. All the while, Jesus sat there in silence, not responding to a single question, not trying to get himself out of it, not trying to maintain his innocence, because he knew what had to be done. The only question he answered was when Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He simply said, "You say that I am." And Pilate, finding no basis for charge against him, but knowing he had to do something, he gave the people what he thought would have been an easy choice. See, by this time it was morning. Crowds had gathered outside of his palace because they had heard what had happened. And so he steps out onto his balcony and he addresses the crowd, because it was Roman custom at that time during the Passover feast that he would release one Jewish prisoner. So he gave them what seemed to be the easiest choice of all time. He stepped out and he asked, "Would you like me to release Jesus, this rabbi, this teacher, this man who I find no basis for charging? Or do you want Barabbas, this criminal, this insurrectionist, this murderer? Who do you want?" It's an easy choice. But the religious leaders had already gotten to the crowd, convinced them that this man had to go. So as he stood there and asked them that question, they chose a criminal over their creator. They said, "Give us Barabbas." With that, Jesus' fate was sealed. He was marched off with a group of Roman guards down to the Roman Praetorium, where he would be tied to a stake to start the slow, methodical process of Roman execution. See, the Roman Empire, they had perfected a lot of things. They were real good at a whole lot. Perhaps the thing they were better at than anything was killing people. In that field, they knew exactly what they were doing. And so as they tied him to that stake, they would take out whips laced with iron, bone, and shards of glass and begin the process of killing him. They would whip him again and again until the flesh on his back would spray open and blood would puddle underneath him, and he would cry out in agony all the while, never once lifting a finger to make it stop, never once using his power to get out of it. He would allow whip after whip to tear into his back. But they were only getting started. See, because after that, they would strip him of his clothes, put a mock robe on him, a crown of thorns on his head, hand him a staff, and say, "Look, it's the King of the Jews." And they would take the staff from his hand and beat him over the head with it, further bloodying, battering, and bruising him, all part of their slow way of killing him. And after that, they would tell him, "It's your turn to carry your cross, march up the hill to Golgotha, where we will finish you." But his body giving way under the pain, giving way under the lashings, under the beatings, it could not carry the weight of the cross. So after a few steps, he would falter and fall, unable to carry the cross up that hill. They would need someone else to carry it for him because his body was already giving out. Upon getting to the top of that hill, they would lay him down on that cross, drive nails through his wrists, drive nails into the wood through his feet, and hang him up on a cross. The creator of the universe, flanked on either side by criminals dying a traitor's death. And as he would hang there, his lungs would be pushed up and slowly begin to be crushed, able to inhale but not exhale. He would slowly suffocate. Arms falling out of their sockets. As he stood there on that cross, the crowd would hurl insults at him and say, "Didn't you say you were the Son of God? Get yourself off that cross." But he knew what had to be done. And as they mocked him, hurled insults at him, cursed him, he had but one thing to say. As his breath would have faltered, hard to even get out the words, as they were cursing him and mocking him, all he had to say was, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive these people who I created, who I love more than anything, who have decided to kill me when I have done nothing wrong. Father, forgive them. As they curse me, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And soon as he hung on that cross, body giving out, wounds baking in the open sun, he would breathe his last breath. And as he breathed his last breath, the religious leaders would breathe their first sigh of relief, because he was done. This movement he had started, that swept across the countryside, this movement he had started telling the people who were supposed to be out that they were in, telling the people that everyone had given up on, that surely God didn't love, that God loved even them. It was done. His followers, hidden throughout the city, scared and hiding, this man who claimed to be more than a man, this man who claimed things about God that certainly couldn't be true because they knew God and they knew exactly what box to put God in. Well, it was done. All of it done. The movement, the man, all of it was done. And for the first time in 3.5 years since Jesus had started his public ministry, religious leaders could breathe a sigh of relief because it was done. But what they thought was done, the thing they had fought so hard to finish, what they thought was done, had only just begun. You see, because 3 days later, after a spear would pierce his side to just make sure that he was truly dead, after his limp body would be taken down from that Roman cross and placed in a borrowed tomb, a giant stone rolled in the front, a Roman seal placed on the front of that stone, and a Roman guard standing in front to make sure nothing happened. 3 days later, that same man whose limp body had been carried down off that cross would get up, rise from the dead, walk, and appear to his closest followers and say, "Put your hands in the holes in my hands where the nails were driven through them. Put your hand in the hole in my side where the spear pierced it. Look me in the eyes and realize that what you thought was done has only just begun." What they thought they had finished is just getting started. Because you see, when Jesus walked out of that grave, he answered the two questions that have plagued mankind for as long as we have been around. He answered the two questions that have kept people up at night, wondering what is the meaning of it all. He's answered the two questions that have eaten away at us for as long as we've been here. Is there a God? And if there is he good? Because I don't know what's more terrifying. To live in a world devoid of God, which means to live in a world devoid of purpose, a world that is nothing more than a cosmic accident, a couple molecules bumped into each other, and here we are, where my life is no more valuable than the ant I stepped in on the way in here, where my life truly has no purpose, where soon the sun will burn up, die, and we will all be forgotten, and it was all for nothing. Or to live in a world where there is a God, but he's not good. To live in a world where there is a God, but he gave up on us a long time ago. Live in a world where there is a God, but he has no room in his heart for people like me or people like you. To live in a world where there's a God, but he doesn't really care. He stopped paying attention to us a long time ago. But you see, when Jesus walked out of that grave, he answered both of those questions, because when he hung on that cross, saying, Father, forgive them, while they cursed him, he answered once and for all that he was good. He showed without a doubt that he was good. He proved beyond a shadow of a doubt this man is good. But the truth of the matter is that there's lots of good people out there. There's lots of heroes. There's people who sacrifice themselves and are truly heroic, admirable people. But it wasn't until he walked out of that grave on the third day that he answered the other question. Is there a God? Because when he walked out of that grave, he proved once and for all that he wasn't just a good man, but he was in fact God, because he had conquered the one thing, the one common trait that has bound all of our lives, that has put a cap on all of us, and has defined the human race since the beginning of time, and that is our own human mortality. The one thing none of us have ever been able to escape, the one thing that has kept its grip on every person who ever lived. Until Jesus walked out of that grave. And when he came out of that grave, he did not say, find me the people who did this to me. He simply said, what more can I do to show you that I love you? Come home, my child. See, he didn't just get up on that cross because it was a good thing to do, or it was one of many things he could have done. He got up on that cross because it was the only option. The reason he knelt in that garden, even when he knew the pain that would come before him, and still said, Father, your will be done, not mine, it's because there was never any other option. See, since the beginning of time, the story of mankind is a story in which God created us, and we rebelled against him. We decided to define good and evil on our own terms. We decided to do things our way. We decided to push away from God even when he was nothing but faithful to us. And when he chased after us again and again, we said, we're not interested, no thank you. We'll do things our way. It's not like that was just some arbitrary bad thing to do. But when we began living against our intended design where we live in harmony with God and in harmony with his good creation and with each other, when we introduced evil into the world, when we introduced this rebellion against God, we introduced this sickness into our souls called sin that has been eating away at all of us from the beginning of time. It's not something that God just said we shouldn't do, but it was something that he knew would kill us. And our souls became sick, slowly deteriorating what God placed in us, the life that he made us for, where we live in harmony with him. And he realized that there was only one option, that his children, whom he loved more than anything, were sick and they needed a remedy. And he and only he could be that remedy. And the only way we could ever get back to the garden, the only way we could ever get back to that harmony with God and with others, was if he came and healed our sick souls, our souls that were hurting, our souls that were not the way they were meant to be. And he said, there is no amount of striving you could do that would ever get you back to God. There is no amount of good deeds that would ever place you back to where you were meant to be, but I can. So he hung on that cross to prove once and for all that you can trust me, that I will never use my power for anything but your good, that my almighty power is restrained by my unending love. What more could I do to show my love for you? Nothing. And he hung on that cross to show us that he was trustworthy and to invite us back home. He looks at us and says, my child, you are not well. I am your remedy. Would you trust me? Would you take my hand and allow me to work in you, to begin healing your soul, to bring you back to the you were meant to be, to bring you back to the way things were always meant to be. And he never forces it on us. He says, my child, will you come home? He didn't do it because it was a good thing to do. He did it because it was all for love. He did it because that is who he is, and he recognized that there was no other way to heal our broken souls than to stand in our place, take our sickness, and offer us a way home. That's the Easter story. It's a story of a father looking at his children and saying, my child, let me help you get well. So my question this morning is, if this is all true, Which, as a side note, I don't even know how it couldn't be. Take the fact alone that you are sitting here today, 2,000 years later, and we have never stopped spreading the news of this event that changed everything. Take the Roman guard placed out in front of the tomb. Take the fact that had they ever been able to produce a body, the entire thing would have ended overnight. So if this is all true, and I don't know how it couldn't be, if this is all true, then what does it mean for you? See, because the Easter story, it's not some nice thing that we can just put in a nice tiny box, place on the shelf, revisit once a year, and just know as a mental thing, but doesn't impact our lives. Because Easter changes everything. Easter changes everything. To start with, it changes who you are. Because your life is now shaped by the love of your Creator who thought you were worth dying for. See, we no longer go through lives wondering if I matter. Do I really have any value? Because the Creator of this whole entire universe, the one who spoke and created the world, the one who breathed the breath of life into the first man, the one who animates the world with his life-giving love and holds it all together, thought you, even if you ran from him forever, even if you rejected him till your last day, still thought you were worth dying for. And the fact is, you can chase down your value in any number of places. You can try to find your worth in your appearance, your academics, your athletics, what your peers think of you, what your family thinks of you. You can try to find your worth in any place you wish. But none of those things, not your abilities, nothing, were ever meant to handle the weight of your worth. None of them. They will all crumple under the weight of your worth. If you chase down your value in those things, I promise you, it will always leave you short. In fact, go even further. Trace back any of the negative patterns in your life, the negative behaviors, emotions, and I guarantee the vast majority of them would come from you trying to find your value in something that was never meant to handle the weight of your worth. The jealousy you feel towards others, your need to compare to others, you feeling like you have to jump higher, run faster, do better, put on a facade to be someone that you're not, all comes from us trying to chase down our worth in something that was never meant to handle the weight of it. You tell me something better to find your value as a human being than in the unending love of your Creator for you, not just as some abstract idea, but so much so that the God who is infinite would enter into creation, become a man, walk with us, talk with us, eat with us, and then hang on a Roman cross to tell you, despite what you may have thought, despite what you may have done, I still think you are worth dying for. But not only does it change who you are, it changes who others are. You see, because you riddle me this. How could you ever hate someone that Jesus thought was worth dying for? How could you ever give up on someone that God thought was worth, that he would never, ever give up on? How could you ever think less of someone? How could you ever say someone was worthless when he thought they were worth giving his own life for? How could you ever hate someone he thought was worth dying for? I don't have an answer to that. Not only does Easter change who you are, not only does Easter change who others are, but maybe above all, what Easter tells us is because you were worth dying for, now you must live for more. See, because your life, it's not your own. You see, the Bible, the story of mankind, it's not a story about good people gone bad. It's a story about living people becoming dead people. The Bible doesn't say that we're good people gone bad. It says that we're walking dead people. Our souls deteriorated by the sickness of sin. But Jesus hung on that cross to give us another shot at life, to give us another shot at the life we were meant for, to give us another shot at the existence we were created for. He offers that to us. And just as the religious leaders thought the entire movement was done, that Jesus was done when he hung on that cross and he had only just begun. I feel like many of us look at the Easter story as if it's done. We look at the Easter story as if it's contained within the leather-bound covers of this book. We look at the story of what God is doing in the world as if it's contained between these two leather covers. But I'm here to tell you that perhaps what you thought was done has only just begun. Because if you caught Jesus on any given day, when he was out preaching and teaching to the multitudes, to the crowds that would swarm around him, you could bet you would find him talking about one thing. He'd be talking about this kingdom that he was starting, this movement that he was kicking off. But it wasn't a kingdom in the traditional sense. It wasn't a kingdom that was defined by a geographic area. It wasn't a kingdom where the people in power used their power for their good, who built their kingdom on the backs of others. It was a kingdom that was much bigger than any earthly kingdom anyone had ever seen. It was a kingdom, it was a movement that was built around the idea of flipping all of our paradigms upside down, telling the people that everyone assumed God had given up on, that God still loved them. It was a kingdom built on the idea of telling the people on the outside, the people that the world said didn't matter, that you matter. Not only do you matter, but you matter so much that God thought you were worth dying for. It was a kingdom ruled by the one ethic of love. How do I love God best and love others? It's a kingdom like none the world had ever seen, and it didn't die with Jesus. When Jesus walked out of that grave, instead of saying, "Find me those people," instead of saying, "Let's get them back," he simply charged his followers with keeping this going, to continue telling the people that thought they were worthless, that thought they were too far gone, that surely God didn't love, that he thought they were worth dying for. That kingdom, it's not done. That movement, it's not done. It has only just begun. He stands there and reaches out his hand to us. He says, "Let me help you. Let me heal your soul. Let me transform you into the person you were always meant to be." Because you see, the thing is, Jesus didn't come to just start a religion. Jesus came to start a movement, to transform lives, transform the whole world. We only transform the world when we reach out and we accept his help, allow him to begin working in our soul. And when our lives are transformed, that kingdom, that movement he was talking about, it grows and it spreads. And when we spread that message of hope to the world, when we tell those people that God hasn't given up on you, and he never, ever will, that kingdom continues to grow, to spread. And as long as there are people in our world who wonder if they matter, as long as our world doesn't look like heaven, as long as our world is still filled with bitterness and anger and hatred and injustice and violence, then we're not done. We've got a whole lot of work yet to do. Jesus is inviting us, despite our past, despite the things we've messed up on, to walk with him. He reaches out his hand and says, "I will never force you. I will never coerce you. But my child, you're not well. May I help you? Will you walk with me? Will you join in this movement with me to transform lives and transform the world?" There are days on this journey of following Jesus that are hard. When we reach out and accept his hand, we don't change overnight. It's not like we become perfect and everything makes sense right away. In fact, in the journey of following Jesus, there's days when we look at the world, we still don't see it through his eyes. We still look at those people and say, "Even them, Jesus? Are you sure? God, are you sure these people, they're still worth saving? God, are you sure this is how you want to do it? You want to do it through us? Why don't you just do it yourself? God, I don't even understand your plan." And it seems to all just be spinning. It seems to not make sense. We seem to not know where we're going. The world, we don't see it through his eyes. We don't see it the way he sees it. And we wonder, what is this even all about? I remember a few years ago, I found myself in Ghana. And while I was there, I became close with this guy named Abraham. And up to this point in my stay in Ghana, I have to be honest, I looked at the city. It looked dusty, dirty. There were open sewers lining the streets. It didn't really seem to have many redeeming qualities. I remember one day he looked at me. He said, "Austin, I want to show you something." I said, "What do you want to show me?" Just follow me. Where we come. Just trust me. Just follow me. And he began leading me down these back alleys, and we began winding around. Then we walked up these rickety set of steps into the second floor of this building, and he pointed to a hole in the roof and a ladder laying on the ground. He says, "Let's go up there." I said, "Are you crazy? Where are we going, man? Just trust me." So I remember climbing up that ladder, hopping up onto the roof, looking out over the city as the sun set, seeing it from a new perspective and realizing, wow, I'd missed it. Realizing it was all far more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. What I had taken to just be a dusty, dirty place with open sewers and with little redeeming qualities, well, it was beautiful. It's those glimpses that we get when following Jesus that change everything. When we follow Jesus and we begin to look at things through his eyes, and we look at our world that, yes, is filled with anger, that, yes, is filled with division, that, yes, is filled with hatred and violence and injustice. And sometimes we see people and we say, "Even them, Jesus, and this doesn't even make sense. Are you sure this is worth saving?" And we look at things through his eyes. We look at the world through the perspective that not only is there a God, but he is good. That same God hung on that cross, had nails driven through his wrists and through his feet. And while we cursed him, and he only said, "Father, forgive them," we see it was all far more beautiful than we could have ever imagined. What we realize when we see things through his eyes is that all of it, from the very first word that spoke creation into existence, all of it, it was all for love. You were created out of God's infinite love for you, out of his desire to give of the life that he has, to share that with you so that you could experience life as he experiences it. And even when we threw that away, even when we began introducing the sickness into our souls that we call sin and slowly deteriorating ourselves, he never gave up on us. And he kept pursuing us. Why? Because he is love. It was all for love. Him never giving up on us, it was all for love. Him entering into his own creation as a baby in the most vulnerable form, and then allowing himself to be crucified on a Roman cross, dying a criminal's death between two criminals on either side, allowing himself to experience pain unimaginable. It was all for love. It was always, only, ever, all for love. The Easter story is not about anything that God gets out of it. It's about him looking at his children, saying, "My child, you are not well. Let me be your remedy. Let me begin to work in your soul. Let me restore you to God." Because no amount of striving, no amount of good deeds, it could ever cross that chasm. It could never get you back to God. It could never get you back to the garden, back to the way things were always meant to be. But let me take that sickness from you. Let me begin to work in your soul. Let me restore you to God, to the one who breathed breath into man. Who said, "Let there be light." There was light, the one who's never given up on you. See, the Easter story changes everything. I don't know where you stand with God, but I know where he stands with you. Whether you're running from him or towards him, whether you're hiding from him or walking into his embrace, no matter what you've done or haven't done, what you've said or haven't said, no matter where you stand with God, I know where he stands with you. Because he's the same God that hung on that cross. And after he came out of the grave, didn't try to hunt down the people who did it to him, but was only interested in his children coming home. And to this day, he reaches out his hand and says, "Will you trust me? My child, you are not well. Let me be your remedy. Will you trust me? Will you join with me in what I'm doing in the world? Will you partner with me in transforming lives and transforming the world? My child, will you trust me? Will you allow me to work in your soul, restore you to what you were always meant to be?" That's the Easter story. It's not a story we can put on a shelf and not revisit till next year. When you understand the Easter story as it is, you realize that we can't help. Take that hand and return home and walk into the loving embrace of our Heavenly Father, because when you see perfect love, and maybe the vision of God you've been given, maybe the picture of God you've been presented with doesn't look like that, but I promise you, if your picture of God looks like anything but perfect love, you've got the wrong picture. Because when you see God like that, you can't help but walk into his arms as he says, "Welcome home, my child." That's Easter. That's the story that has captivated the hearts of billions through the years. That's what brings us in these seats today. That's what makes us get up in the morning and realize that there was a purpose, that there was a plan, that our life, it's not about just passing through, it's not about going through the motions, but it's about living for love, because it was all for love. From our creation to his crucifixion. It was always, only ever, for love. We came from the perfect source of love. We were created out of love. We are called to live in love. It's our destiny to return home to that source of love, to walk into the warm embrace of our Heavenly Father who just says, "Welcome home, my child." Let's pray. Dear God, I thank you for bringing us here this morning. I thank you that 2,000 years ago, you hung on that cross out of love for us. Thank you that no matter what we do, it will never keep you from loving us. There's nothing we could ever do to keep you from loving us. God, when we wonder what more could you do to show your love for us, we know the answer is nothing. That you have proved once and for all that not only you are good, but you are God and you want nothing but our highest good. And that all of it was all for love. And God, I pray more than anything, these students here today, they would look you in the eyes and realize that you are nothing but love. You will never abandon them. You will never give up on them. No matter what they do, your stance towards them never changes. It's one of love. You see our sick souls. You say, "Let me be your remedy." God, I thank you for inviting us into this Easter story and giving us the opportunity to pick up the pen and write the next chapter of human history, to continue writing, return the world one person at a time back to what it was always meant to be. God, we love you. We praise you. For it's in your name we pray.